2021. Meeting is being conducted electronically pursuant to Open Meetings Act MCL 15.263(2) and MCL 15.263(a) 1B. Jamie, could you start us off with a roll call?
Yes, Director Colwick.
Present.
Oh, if you'll mention what city you're located in right now.
In Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Director Fuller.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Director Glasser has mentioned his absence. Chair Leto.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Director Mcnellis.
Matawan, Michigan.
Director Martin.
Present in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
And Director Sylvester.
Present in Kalamazoo.
Thanks.
Okay, and then as mentioned, Director Glasser is absent today. Can I entertain a motion to excuse absent members?
So moved.
All right,
Or
motion by Director Mcnellis, seconded by Director Colwick. All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okey doke, motion passes. Absent members are excused. Next up is the adoption of the formal agenda. Any changes the directors would like to see? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, motion by Director Mcnellis,
Support.
seconded by Director Martin. All in favor, say yes.
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 Yes, any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Item D on the agenda, on the approved agenda, is the meeting minutes from June 22nd. So is there any commentary or corrections or otherwise a motion to approve the minutes from June 22nd?
So moved.
Okay,
support.
motion by Director Mcnellis, second by Director Colwick. All in favor, say yes.
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 Yes. Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, motion carries. Minutes are passed. Item E on the agenda are our general citizen comments. Do we have, from IT, do we have any general citizen comments tonight?
There are no citizen comments at this time.
All right, we're flying through this agenda. Okay, any general comments from the board? All right. With that, then we'll move on to our first item of new business on the agenda. Got 3 items today. And yeah, you want to start us off, Jamie, with the board member items?
Yes. So thank you, Chair Leto. Today, the board's going to be voting to recommend reappointment of 2 current directors whose first terms are expiring. So according to the NFP Review Board's bylaws, directors may serve up to 2 consecutive 3-year terms before they term off the board. And when the NFP board was first formed, we staggered those terms. So we've had some shorter terms coming up here. So initially we had 2 directors that were given a 1-year term. We have 2 directors this year who are coming up on their 2-year terms. And then we have 3 members who have the full 3-year term. And as you can imagine, the purpose is that we would avoid having all this turnover at the board at one time. So now kind of moving forward, everyone would have those 2 3-year terms. Both Director Mcnellis and Director Glasser, when I reached out to them, communicated that they would be, they'd like to serve an additional term. And really their experience and contributions to the board have been really valuable. If you remember when the board was set up, there is specific expertise and roles or background that each of the board members provide. And so, they've really been able to, I think, fulfill those roles and, provide value to the board over this last 2 years. And so, I think having them on for an additional 3-year term would be fantastic. So the motion in front of you today is a recommendation to the mayor and city commission to reappoint for this term. It is according to the ordinance, the mayor and city commission who have that authority to reappoint our members. So Mitch, I can take any questions at this time.
Okay, yeah, any questions about the terms? The current terms for Jamie? Okay. So at this time, we can entertain a motion to approve that, right, Jamie? Okay, we entertain a motion to approve a recommendation to the mayor and city commission to reappoint directors Mcnellis and Glasser to a second 3-year term.
So moved.
Support.
All right, we've got motion by Director Colwick and second by Director Fuller.
Other way around.
Other way around, okay. I'm
Got it.
glancing back and forth between the agenda and the Zoom screen. Okay, so all in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Aye.
Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, the motion carries. Congratulations, Paul and Director Glasser. And then let's see, any more questions on this item? Okay, or discussion.
I do. I'm sorry, Jamie. So at the end of my second term, then this is the next 3 years, then I have to step off of the board. Is that right?
Yes, I believe the way the bylaws are written, once a member terms off, they have to be off for 3 years and then they could be reappointed to the board for additional 2 terms. So it's 1 term off and then you can kind of restart. And then we'll also mention too, it may be a couple more years until this board is looking for new members. If we go strictly by the terms, but I know all sorts of things can happen and members have to leave for different reasons. But what we typically do at the city is we will, once we know there's a vacancy, staff will work with the board to get out sort of an advertisement, letting the public know who we're like, what, that we have openings on a board and, what the board's looking for. And then, try to make sure we're really getting that out to our networks. And often with boards, we'll form like a committee that'll do some interviews, vet those applications that come in and do some interviews and make a recommendation again like this, but it'd be a new member making that recommendation to the city commission and the mayor.
Jamie, are the bylaws, I'm looking in the actual NFP document itself, and there's like a review bodies and processes. But I don't see the re-election, just to kind of review that. I don't see the re-election and appointment specifics in there. So that's a separate bylaws document.
Yeah, the bylaws are separate. I'll make sure I send a copy out to all of the board members. Those
Okay.
were developed and approved by this board back like in probably July of 2019.
Yep. Okay. Sounds familiar. All right. Any more
And Mitch, I
questions
know
on-
you have a big agenda in front of you, so we're down to number 2 under new business.
Yeah, it is a little busier than normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so item number 2, election of NFP Review Board Chair and Vice Chair positions for a 1-year term. And is there anything you want to talk about with that then, Jamie?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that today we're looking for new board leadership, the roles of chair and vice chair. And according again to the bylaws, the board would elect these new positions each year. And the role of the position for chair is really to lead the board and facilitate the board meetings, as you've noticed Chair Leto doing for the last, it's actually been 2 years since we've gotten our feet underneath us as a brand new board. The vice so Vice Chair Colwick has agreed to step up into that chair position. And what we're looking for today is the board to, come up with a volunteer, someone who's willing to serve in that vice chair position. This member tends to, support the chair, but especially something to keep in mind is that this individual will then step in and facilitate and chair the meetings when the chair is unavailable, right? When they're unable to attend the meeting. And so I know with Director Colwick's, job, she can sometimes have field work and work that conflicts with attending this meeting at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so we're really hoping that we can get a chair to step up, or a vice chair to step up, who can kind of fill in, be at the meetings regularly and fill in when needed. As you've noticed, Chair Leto does have a script in front of him. We try to, as staff, provide a chair copy of the agenda, so it kind of help walk you through Robert's rules and how to kind of conduct business. And so you won't be left out there completely on your own as vice chair when that time comes to facilitate that meeting.
Well,
Basically, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Jamie makes it really easy.
Yeah, I just gonna say, Mitch, you've done such a wonderful job. Now my bubbles burst. You're reading a script.
Yeah. You don't think you can go up from here, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay. Any more questions on that?
So what do you guys think? Anybody interested in the vice chair position? And, I think whoever it is, I'd be willing to work with and let, maybe when my field schedule is going to keep me from being away, and attending, and then we can make sure it works. And I do have some degree of flexibility with my schedule, and I usually know when I'm going to be out of town for the whole week, a little bit ahead of time.
Not to play the not me game, but I think we're going to be going back to in-person meetings sometime in the next several months. We're not sure when. My only concern about doing that is that I do leave in the wintertime. I arrange my travel to come back to Kalamazoo when I have client meetings, and hopefully that can be worked around when we have these meetings. But I would defer from doing it because I'm away a lot in the wintertime, and what you need is somebody who can actually be there and bring the group through the motions of the meeting. But beyond that, that I'd be happy to do it were it not for my absence in the wintertime.
Yeah, thank you, Alan.
Jamie, do you see, I was just kind of thinking about talking about the field season and the flow of projects to review. Do you see any seasonality with the projects that come through the NFP review board process, like seeking a variance as far as when developers or property owners would be applying for those variances? Or is it just seems like it's just sort of intermittent and there's no super rhyme or reason to it? But
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like most often we consider the construction season, and right before the construction season is our department's busy time. But when we see projects that are, maybe really thinking ahead and well organized, they may be seeking variances and rezonings and things like that over the winter to get ready for a construction season. And then definitely, kind of right after the first of the year, we're going to see a lot of projects trying to get their approvals in place so they can break ground as soon as the weather is a little bit nicer. So it's a little bit difficult to say. I think if we had a slow time, it might be in the fourth quarter of the year.
okay, so actually the busier time for us in terms of a director facilitating the meeting or a co-director having to, in the director's absence, would be winter time, early spring, probably. Okay. All right. Any more questions for Jamie? Next question. Any volunteers for the vice chair?
I knew it, Paul. I wasn't gonna volunteer you, but
Yeah, damn it. Okay. No, I would be happy to. I just hope my memory or my mind doesn't go between now and then, because it's been failing on me. So, okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to.
You've been
Thank you,
saying that for
Paul.
10 years, Paul, so I think we're okay.
Well, it's 84. That's, that's what all my stuff runs out. That's what my guy that does all of my, money handling and stuff, he says, yeah, you can have this income till you're 84 and then it's gone. I said, well, what happens then? He says, well, shit, you'll either be dead or you won't care. So, okay.
Love the context.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. So now I'm looking for a motion to elect Director Colwick as board chair and Director Mcnellis as vice chair. If there's no more discussion, can I entertain a motion for that?
That seems like the least thing I can do. Just make that motion. So I will boldly step forward and move that Ashley serve as our chair and Paul as our vice chair for the next year.
All right, great.
Support.
Motion by Director Sylvester and second by Director Martin. All in favor, say yes.
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 Any opposed? Okay, seeing none, motion passes. Great, got some fresh blood. Item number 3 under letter G, new business, is NFP phase 2 and phase 3. It's like the Marvel movies, they just keep coming out with more of them and they keep getting better. Sorry, phase 3 initiatives. Jamie, do you wanna kick us off there?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There will be no board action on this item, but I wanted to take a moment definitely to breathe after a lot of work that this board has done over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, and congratulate you on, as you know, the City Commission's adoption of NFP Phase 2 amendments to both the map and the text, which happened last Monday, and they go into effect 10 days after that vote. And so, middle of this week, that will be official. What staff has been doing is working to update our NFP overlay map on the city's public GIS website. And I know Nolan has done a lot of work with IT staff, and that thing's ready to roll. It'll be coming out later this week. We're also working on getting the edits uploaded into our online e-code system. And so those should be getting going online soon as well. And one of the last tasks that staff has to do is work with MNFI to update our pre-screening tool, which is like our GIS tool, letting parcels know if they have to do that rare species search or if they're already kind of cleared through MNFI. With phase 2 passing, we're going to think about eventually moving into phase 3. I'm not saying that we have to do that immediately, but I do have certain neighborhoods who've been reaching out saying, they've been working on things and want to continue to work on things that would really kind of fall into the category of phase 3. And so I'd like to just kind of throw out a few things for the board to consider and to discuss today and think about how you want to move into a bit of like the process and procedure of the board, and then also how you guys can help sort of facilitate phase 3 along with staff. So thinking about this in kind of 2 ways. One is, functioning as a board. We've been doing to date, 2 years, maybe right around a dozen or just less than a dozen projects have gone through the NFP process and been approved through this board. So we can kind of anecdotally think about and track what's happened with those cases, right? What's worked well, what have been challenges, and that's helped really shape the amendments that came that went into phase 2 and were adopted by City Commission. Moving forward, with a much bigger overlay district with a lot more parcels, it seems like this board's going to be probably a bit busier. You'll probably have your regular monthly meetings and you'll have probably a project or 2 every month to start reviewing and approving. That's what I would guess. And I think that kind of tracking in our minds those projects and outcomes will get harder, right? There'll be a lot more projects over time. And so I want us to think about, are there ways that staff can provide information and tracking for you all, even really at a macro scale, so that perhaps you can be thinking about, or, have a way to kind of look back on projects that have been reviewed, at what meeting, what was the outcome? Was it, just a variance? So they're kind of in the first step and they'd be coming back to the board. I think there might be some information, we track that and keep that in some of our city database and files, but for you all, we could think of a way to make that information available to you. And then also thinking about some sort of way maybe to track the anything that you might want to propose in an amendment in the future. Now, this is definitely thinking way off, but there's always seems to be lessons learned from different projects that come forward and you're reviewing. And so it might be nice to be able to capture that in some way and to just kind of keep track of what challenges with the code or interpretations of the code seem to be maybe not as smooth, or what works really well. I mean, we could really think about how we capture that, but that we probably should do some sort of tracking as a group. And so I'd love to explore and think about what would serve the board best in that way. And then before I get too far ahead of ourselves, and we can maybe kind of think about the internal stuff, but then I'd like to talk about if the NFP review board is really thinking about and spending time on reviewing and approving projects, how can you be involved in phase 3? Is that going to be a more staff-led initiative? I would love to see the NFP review board be quite involved, perhaps leading it, or at least in a really support role. So I'd love to hear about your thoughts on what that looks like. If you remember, there's not a super solidified plan around what phase 3 looks like, but kind of always from the beginning, it was this idea that the zoning and enforcement part is sort of one way to get at protecting natural features, but we are probably going to need, or we definitely are going to need some sort of voluntary, non-regulatory type initiatives as well. So I think that we've always sort of broadly envisioned that as a combination of public education, neighborhood engagement and projects, some citizen science, and also we've been throwing around this sort of continuous improvement in managing city properties and natural areas generally throughout the city. And so I think all of those things are kind of on the table. And for phase 3, I think it's really thinking about and developing, maybe it's something short of a plan, but sort of a strategy or an agenda, or a top list of projects that you want to see the city help with community partners and neighborhood associations pursue in the next couple of years. And so, I might throw out, it could be, the format could be its own, committee of this board, and that could be maybe a couple of board members. And then you could definitely invite, non-voting outside members to serve on that committee, and they could, report back to the board as a whole. And you guys could sort of think about and shape and direct some of that work in that way, where you're not having to attend a bunch of other meetings. You could have a committee and get other folks throughout the community who might want to contribute to that. But that's just one idea. So with that, I'm just going to open it up to discussion on those sort of two topics moving forward. And we can recap on phase 2 as well, if anyone feels like they have some comments to make to the board. But really thinking about that internal tracking and operation now that we're going to have more projects moving through, and then also what ways this board wants to contribute to and lead the phase 3 activities.
Yep, Paul, go for it.
Yeah, Jamie, just the way that you put it out, that's neighborhoods getting involved. I've been working with the Oakland Drive Winchell neighborhood and their environmental committee for quite some time now. And I was on a group that put together a forum on stormwater and on construction sites, stormwater control, and that was really quite a good one. It happened. The neighborhood or the forum committee put that together right after we had that huge storm and a whole bunch of topsoil from BTR2 over on Drake Road ended up in Asylum Lake. And anyway, that to me was actually the type of things that, or the type of education and discussion that that we should be supporting for phase 3. There's that the forum hasn't put on. They planned on doing one, or we planned on doing one on road salt and the impact on the environment and stuff. But that then COVID came along, and anyway, we never got that one off the ground. But the group, the core group of that, we're still talking about putting on some educational things for the community, not just Oakland Drive neighborhood, in the conservation area. And I think I would like to, well, I support it because I'm helping with that. But I think if the NFP board, if our board gave a little bit of guidance and say, well, let's look at all the phases of NFP and let's come up with, I like you do a great presentation for the NFP, for the entirety of the whole program and everything. But, do some similar things for each area, like the trees and the stormwater and and it looks to me like there are some outside of our board, there are some people that, and I know them, I see them, I talk with them, that would be willing to do some things, and we could support that rather than have to do all the planning for it. We can just work with them and say, yeah, we support it, and be the cheerleader on that. So okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think I've had similar thoughts to Paul, and I'll kind of build on those ideas too. I think that the current NFP language that we have provides a really good baseline for protection of natural features, but they're pretty reasonable, I guess, in my view. I think property owners could certainly go above and beyond in protecting the natural features, and we definitely don't want to get in the way of that. And having resources or having incentives for folks to go above and beyond. If you're developing a 50-acre woodlot, you only have to keep 14.5 acres wooded according to the NFP, like for example. So that's a pretty relatively small area. So, what kind of incentives or recognition or resources could we have for property owners or folks that are going through the NFP process that want to go above and beyond to either recognize them or help them do that? So I kind of feel like what we have on the books now is a good safety net, and it's a really good baseline. And like Paul was mentioning, the road salt and sedimentation and things like that, are there like best practices and things that we can put out there as addendums or amendments or whatever, so that, here are the standards, but these are the best practices. And, we like to encourage these, but this is the required. I don't know, just sort of exploring that idea of what kind of incentives could we provide to go above the baseline. And we really kind of struggled on the tree item, ultimately trying to figure out how that would mesh with residential property owners in particular who might be coming up against NFP. And there was a lot of desire to protect trees, but it seemed like a really difficult way to do it. So maybe incentives are right for that. So yeah, just sort of that general idea of building on the baseline.
I agree with both of you. And I think that you like the idea of the NFP and all of that, it's really reactionary. And I think that having a more proactive approach that's voluntary for community members. I think that it'll take a little while to shape what that might look like. But never too early to start, right, Jamie?
I agree with everybody. And I think kind of back to one of your original questions, Jamie, I would love to have this board have involvement, maybe not, maybe like you mentioned, have a subcommittee with some members of this board and some neighborhood associations and other local environmental organizations to kind of craft some ideas. But I was just thinking that there's surely is some education that could be important, because I was just remembering at one point we got a comment from somebody just concerned that we were worried about erosion because they'd never seen erosion anywhere in the city. And there's erosion in the city. So I think even just letting folks know, like, what is erosion? What does it look like? Where is it? And why is it a problem? Just as like one tiny example, I think it's clear if we can come up with some interesting ways to educate folks so they see why we're doing what we're doing, because I think there clearly were people that didn't understand the point of the NFP. And so I think if we can connect those dots a little better for people who don't have the natural resources background that we do, those questions, like to us, that's like seems like an obvious thing, but obviously it is not to most people in the city. So I really like outreach and education. So I'd love to be part of a subcommittee that works on that stuff and tries to come up with some just different ways to deliver information. I think with social media, there's so many tools and new ways to get to people that wouldn't usually engage with city information. I think that could be really fun.
Yeah, I was going to ask Aaron or Jamie, like, what platforms for kind of education you see. I mean, I think there's like people who will be coming up against the actual zoning itself, but I guess just as a general education about natural features or whatever. I mean, I'm thinking like an actual tour of the city and like erosion areas or videos, or I just think we've been getting a lot of good participation with these meetings, but that's still a very, very limited like subset of the city residents. Just curious.
I don't have a grand vision yet, but I would, I think like really short video clips that can get shared on social media. And if they're engaging enough, like this is erosion, it's not going to get anybody. But if you can have a short clip that is engaging, I'll have to wrap my head around what that looks like. But memes, I mean, all kinds of different things that would attract people's attention just in a different way. Obviously we'll need the city to sign off on some of these things. So maybe I'm getting too out in left field, but I think we can come up with a variety of different things, not just a fact sheet that gets ignored, but maybe like a photo spread. I don't know. I will certainly start pondering this more, but yeah, I like the idea of coming up with a bunch of different ways to reach people and not just one thing.
Yeah, I was just going to comment how I've heard, this board talk about, in particular, some of those like best practices that Mitch mentioned and how we should be using the city's website and Imagine Kalamazoo more effectively in doing that. And then I would also follow up on what Director Fuller said that about videos, and that our city communication staff has been really promoting videos. And I think we've gotten a lot of good interaction on social media. I feel like even the NFP video that Amanda Cockcroft helped me do at the city, just even, the folks who had kind of reached out and sent a quick note saying, hey, I saw your video, and, it was getting attention. So that's, I think there are some things that we could do at the city in particular. I think that the sky's the limit. We could talk about if we have different programs and needs, do we need to think about how to get funding and how to, get some like a nonprofit to help us with some of that initiative. And then we at the city are able to like be the connector in a lot of ways. And I think one of the things that could be nice if we do get like a committee formed to work on this, I'd love to bring in our neighborhood activator who's he's relatively new, but the city's had this position for a while now. And so half of our neighborhoods, maybe getting close to half of our neighborhoods, have or will have soon their own neighborhood level plan. And so a lot of those have initiatives that kind of align with natural features protection. And so helping, I think connecting and working with neighborhoods who've said they want to do these kind of things could go a long way. And then also, I know Mitch in particular has brought up some models for natural area management and where it's being done in different cities and how maybe that's something we look into, and that's a much bigger funding initiative, but it's definitely, I think, really within the realm of a phase 3. And so, yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities, and it's probably going to be getting a group of folks together and vetting what opportunities are, really ripe, and what how do you prioritize those and start pursuing them.
I just had another thought that's maybe equally as left field as like TikTok videos and memes, but I'll have to think about this a little more before I have an idea if it's good or not. But I just was thinking our work is so focused on a very specific geographic area, but I bet there are a lot of people outside of that area who would be interested in following our standards, and just wondering if there is an easy way to maybe like have a certification or something if somebody develops a parcel using our standards that is doing it voluntarily, giving them some support, but also some recognition. I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think recognition can go a long way, especially if it's related to like public perception and some of these commercial areas within the city, maybe not as much residential, but it could be like there's lots of certification programs, but I don't know if it would be listed or just another feather to put in the cap of somebody who's, doing housing or development and did it the right way. I think that's a great idea. I do have a question for Jamie, which you can feel free to not answer. And I'm sure you've been getting this question a lot in the last couple of weeks, but is the Foundation for Excellence, would that create any type of opportunities for NFP phase 3 type initiatives to happen? I mean, specifically, I was thinking of the natural areas that the city owns and stewardship in those areas and those sorts of things. Obviously, that would kind of require more sustained funding. So maybe it's like a pulse of funding for specific projects, but not a sustained fashion, or maybe it is, but I just thought I'd ask to kind of get a sense of like what kind of support there would be for these initiatives beyond volunteer, help.
Yeah, I think so. The Foundation for Excellence dollars have been set aside kind of for two distinct purposes. One is to help support the city's overall general fund budget, and that was able to leverage a decrease in the tax rates for folks throughout the city. But there's also that pot of money for aspirational type projects. And so anything that is part of the Imagine Kalamazoo and city strategic vision and our master plan is sort of always kind of been eligible, if you will, for that funding. I mean, those dollars are really set aside to help the city implement their master plan, and natural features protection absolutely came out of the city's master planning process and Imagine Kalamazoo. So, for that reason, I'd say just generally speaking, yes, I think that it's in alignment with where those or how those dollars are spent. I think if we have specific ideas or initiatives or projects that we know are going to need a budget and need support, that's something that staff are able to then bring up to our, directors and city leadership, and then try to work that into a budget as it gets approved each year for FFE. So the short answer is yes, I think it's very well aligned. The longer answer is we'll need to kind of figure out the priorities of that fund and how we can fit those in. But I think you're right on with that.
Yeah, I was just thinking how when we were looking at the NFP map, we, really pulled out Kleinstuck and Asylum Lake and Bow in the Clouds as kind of three feature natural areas in the city because they have, public access and they're kind of recognized by the community for that reason, but that there's potentially other areas. I think city parks, we kind of had as an aside and often natural features already lined up there, but just trying to think about what areas could, we could essentially have more than three, and just thinking about quality of life for residents and whether that means like public access or greater value in the community in those areas or those sorts of things. Yeah, not really a question, just a thought.
Along with that, Mitch, there's the Oakland Drive Winchell Neighborhood Association has developed a walk, WALK. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what that acronym stands for, but it's Asylum Lake and Kleinstock. It's the green zone, or the green corridor between the two of them. And there's 7 city pocket, I call them pocket parks, between Asylum Lake and Kleinstock. And Glen Park South is one that I've taken an interest in. In fact, I'm writing a management plan for it, which is, I'm just cut and pasting what Kleinstock has, Aaron. But anyway, they're really fired up. The neighborhood is really fired up about that, about they've made this walk route. They're putting signs along it with, at each one of these pocket parks with a QR code, so you can look at more information about each one. Anyway, that's the educational part of what they're doing, and I think that would tie in nicely to our mission in phase 3 of the NFP.
That's really cool. I haven't heard of that. It makes sense. It has a lot of overlap with the NFP designated areas and Woods Lake too. Jamie, I have a couple questions. So for NFP 2, is it officially effective now as far as the increased geographic area that was added in NFP 2? So if a project were in that area, it would go through the filter as of the city commission meeting, or is there like an official start date? I know you said you were updating the kind of public interface parts, but is it in effect now, or?
I believe it takes 10 days past the vote, so that'll be tomorrow, Thursday. And then yes, as projects come through our office, they'll be flagged as NFP according to the new overlay district.
Okay. The other question I had, or I guess thought, is it seems like we weren't able to do as much for trees in neighborhoods as we had kind of hoped to, and maybe NFP wasn't, the right tool for that. I think we looked at like other site plan review stuff that might come into contact with that. But I also know there's like a trees committee that already meets, and so maybe it's something that they're already doing. But we also talked about the centenarian old bur oaks that were here before the city was really set up, and sort of like recognizing heritage trees, or just trying to do more for tree protection, I guess, in the NFP or out of the NFP, and whether that's something that maybe that's a tree committee item, but I feel like that was something that we fell short on, that we were kind of saying, well, maybe it's another body that helps, preserve mature trees in neighborhoods and plant trees in neighborhoods, or maybe it's a future phase or something.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting idea of how we interface with the tree committee. So the way the tree committee is set up is that they have jurisdiction over trees within the public right of way. So if you want to cut down a tree or change something in the public right of way, you have to go to that board for approval. And similarly, site plans that are looking to change trees in the public right of way. There are some standards on sort of what trees need to be planted and where, and that goes through tree committee as well. But it really has to do with public right of way. So it's not in the other parts of the site. That's where, you know, if it's in the overlay district for NFP, NFP kind of takes over. I think there's some work for us to do to kind of, I mean, I've been talking with, it's a board directed by, or that serves the Public Services Department. And so we've kind of been talking about how our rules should make sure that they are compatible. They don't have to be like perfectly aligned, right? Because I think the way we think about and treat trees in the public right of way is a bit different than what, you know, with NFP, you're talking about sites that might have very different conditions. You know, you just have a lot more variety of sites, whereas working in the right of way is sort of that narrow right by the street, typically, you know, right of way. So again, the standards should be compatible, but they might be different. You know, how we require things in the curb lawn is going to probably look different than what we want to apply to a vacant wooded 5-acre parcel.
Building on that, I wonder if, as we're talking about phase 3 and more education and outreach, if having almost like a retreat or a planning session with the other committees that cover environmental issues. So I'm just off the top of my head, I'm thinking the tree committee and the environmental concerns committee, and there may be others that I am forgetting at the moment, but having maybe all of us hopefully gather in a room in person at some point when that's possible and just talk about what the gaps are, because I bet the people on the tree committee feel constrained by only being able to work in the right of way and have some ideas for what other things to do, especially if we're talking education and voluntary type things. I bet we could have some really interesting ideas come out. And same with Environmental Concerns Committee. I mean, I think they cover a wide range of environmental concerns that we don't necessarily think about. And I think it would be very interesting to be in a room with those folks and see what things come up to them. Like, people are making complaints to them regularly, and what are those, and are there things, if we are starting to talk about education, it would be good to hear where they feel some gaps might be.
Yeah, Erin, you bring up a great point about a retreat, and I would like to get on an annual schedule for retreats. Most of our boards do a retreat, whether it's just in your own standing meeting time, or it can be something a little bit longer in an evening or a weekend or even a weekday, whatever you choose, typically with something like a tour. So I think that as we see what happens with the pandemic and with COVID numbers, it might line up that there are a couple of projects that could be wrapping up. It might be this year or at least early next year that you all have had a hand in and have approved an NFP site plan. And so that might be valuable every year to go out and see some of those sites. But yeah, I like the idea of the cross-pollination and collaboration with other boards. So I'll keep that in mind as we're planning for a retreat. I was hoping to do something even within this year. So maybe that's a good opportunity. If we aren't able to drive around and look at sites, we might be able to do something like that. And that kind of brings up the idea of like some of our own internal board processes and stuff. So before we adjourn, I want to make sure we cover some of those topics too.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add that, you know, Erin, you said that this would be something you'd be interested in with this phase 3 and more of the outreach stuff. And as we were in the first couple years of this board and we were realizing that the ordinance and the language wasn't perfect, and as we were going through different cases, I had in my brain each time, like, I wish one of us was kind of charged with keeping those notes each time we're like, okay, this doesn't make sense. And so I'm wondering if that's something that, you know, just jotting a couple notes to yourself, either after meetings or, you know, if we had a common document to kind of just keep all of those ideas, or, you know, maybe we can all do it. But Erin, I don't mean to call you out specifically, but it's just something that I wish when we went to, you know, revise for phase 2, I kind of was like, I know I had so many thoughts in the moments, and I wish I would have put those all in one place, you know, over those 2 years. So I don't know if anyone has a thought on moving forward, a better way to organize that.
Maybe even just a short debrief after each approval or each case that we deal with, if like,
Yeah,
I don't know
maybe
if that's the way to do it, but then it would be in the minutes at least.
I think that's good too. Yeah. Or when we have a summary, a document summary of all the cases, if in the comments there, we put things that didn't quite align or make sense. So it's just something to think about as we think about phase 3, even though it's not happening really anytime soon. So, yeah.
Jamie, did you say there were some other review processes or something that you wanted to cover in this meeting tonight? Beyond just discussion of kind of phase 3?
No, I think Director Colwick kind of touched on some of those. Staff would love feedback and would like to know how we can help with some of that tracking stuff that she brought up. And, it's something that Noel and I can help, mine through some of our city records and put them in a summary format for you all and give you access to those, whether that's like through a shared Google Drive or something like that. So you could kind of have at your fingertips just some of the information. I know in particular, Director Mcnellis has, been keeping an eye on one of the NFP sites on Stadium Drive that was approved and how the construction's rolling out there. And he may want to comment on that later in the meeting. But that, it kind of helps to go back and like maybe glance at the site plan or know some of the, big overview kind of details of that if you're being asked or thinking about some of those sites. So that's all I had. I just wanted to kind of throw that out and have that discussion. I think the feedback we've gotten so far is really good. And I also think part of it was just planting the seed for you all to think about over the next month or two. I would say that, I think in the near term, I would like to, and I know staff would like to probably start in on some of this phase 3.
So yeah, that's a really good point. Just basically whenever a project comes through, we, send it off, and then 6 months to a year later, whatever, construction starts, and probably some of us see it, but probably a lot of us don't. So, but I'm guessing like due to the site standards and site plan review that there are city staff who go out and check boxes as far as stormwater and all of that. So are you kind of saying that it would just be maybe a matter of like gathering their notes for these things to see like how they were able to meet the NFP standards, like in particular, like after it kind of leaves our...
Yeah, I'd like to at least have an archive of the sites so that a list of sites that you've approved over time and some level of detail about them.
Yeah, just even having a simple spreadsheet with the address, the date of the review, whether or not there was a variance requested, what type, how we voted, and then just brief comments. And it's my thought that this would be something that would not only be good for us to kind of know now that we're having enough projects that we don't all remember exactly how which one sorted out, but also in another year and 2 and 3, when we have almost an entire board turnover, and we can have that document for Jamie for annual reports to have really easy way to tabulate. So we're not going through the, sometimes 30, 40 page meeting minutes to summarize things. And then, to just have a general summary of how many cases we reviewed in a year. And I think that also can maybe help us in board recruitment to know that it's not some huge unsurmountable amount of time that you're, because it does take a little bit of time to research each case before a meeting. I think I would recommend to a new board member to put 2 hours aside to look at a case before a meeting, but to understand kind of, okay, well, in 2020, there were 6 of them. It's not like 6 a month. And then I also think it would be good to be sharing with the public that, and especially those that maybe were against the NFP, that to demonstrate that we really have been working with both the developers and, eventually private residences to figure out what works for the parcels. Because some of these that are, especially with slope, it's tricky areas to deal with, so.
Yeah, and
And
actually, I think
Yeah.
that
Okay.
can be really helpful for new applicants too, for NFP. If somebody is like coming up against the slope requirement or planting standards or woodland or whatever, there could be a list of sites available. We could kind of memorialize like how they went through the process, and 2 years later, here's what they look like. And that developer, homeowner, or whatever could go look at those sites after the fact and see that like it's possible and here's how it looks.
Yeah. And maybe even a summary document that could have those spaces for if Paul goes there, if he has a comment on the, the 2 year after thing too. I think, yeah. So I'm just a big fan of really concise summary data. So I think Jamie and Nolan, if that's something you guys could help do in, the 2 historical years now of sites, and then it will be a super quick, even something I can do after a meeting to update that. Yeah. That's all.
Awesome. Totally agree. All right. Any more comments or discussion on NFP phase 2? It's now passed, or future phase 3.
Thank you so much, Jamie. You had a huge role in helping communicate all of this to everyone, and hearing all of our feedback, and you too, Nolan. So I really appreciate it. And I felt like all of us were really heard, and you were such a great translator to the public about it. So.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you. And I also appreciate, I know probably folks from the board, but certainly folks throughout the community who really were strong supporters. And I know they had a lot to do with both the Planning Commission and the City Commission feeling comfortable knowing that it was a direction that the city as a whole and residents wanted to move in. So thank you.
Yeah, I think the public facing material, the maps and everything, having all the different features on each parcel made it like as easy to understand as possible. And listening to the city commission meeting, hearing some people call in who were not believers at first, but contacted you or other city staff and were able to like work through the details and find out that it wasn't anti-development, just learn more about the standards and everything, and actually like calling in, going out of their way to call in to advocate for it, I think is like a huge sign of success. And it's really hard to do anything that doesn't get some level of opposition, because you can't make everybody happy. So as far as I saw, there were all positive comments in the city commission meeting. So that was pretty awesome.
I've heard a little bit of good-natured groaning behind the scenes from a few client groups, and I groan right back that these are just, you guys, you have to jump through lots and lots of hoops to get to your reward. These are just additional hoops you have to go through, and they know it. And this development work is extremely complicated. It's extremely demanding, and the odds are not good. And you just have to work through this. It's going to make it a stronger community, and it's going to make yours a stronger project as well. And I think smart development groups know that, and they accept that.
More environmentalists and developers should be friends, Alan.
I agree. I agree. At least of the enlightened sort. Yes. And I think the ideas you were talking about, that you were describing, Ashley, of keeping this listing, this comprehensive listing, that's going to be valuable to the development community to sort of see that history. Thinking about the Harrison Circle project that we reviewed, thinking about the project out on Stadium Drive that I think we're about to hear some more about. I eventually drove behind Heritage Community to see that development work that they're doing, but that's going to start to be really a healthy history. And and many folks in the development community know these different sites, these different, even some of the different development groups, and they can call each other and talk about how did you work through that? What were the obstacles you confronted? What are the things we have to avoid or to steer toward in developing our site in an NFP overlay? That's good stuff. I mean, that's just how commerce evolves, right?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think the other thing that comes to mind is if, probably not in the short term, but in the long term, if some of these parcels have already gone through NFP once and we talk about like, is the footprint changing? If it's not, it probably doesn't need to trigger NFP. If the footprint and the build out of the building is going to increase, it will trigger NFP. But for example, if a development has already been created and they had to clear 30% of their woodland to develop that site, are those numbers being memorialized so that it doesn't reset and it just becomes an infinitely smaller piece of woods, but that we know, 20% has already been compromised. So you can take up to, 10% or 35% or whatever it is.
I really appreciate those comments, Alan, and it triggered another thought back to the outreach and education, wondering if it might be useful to at some point have a training session for developers where we get a bunch of them in a room and we like board and staff combined maybe can show some examples of successes or issues that came up and how they were resolved, and just sort of give them maybe make it a little more comfortable. I know Jamie has a lot of one-on-one phone calls and meetings, but I don't know how reachable that community is if they would come to something like that. But just
I wonder
as
about
you were
that
saying
too.
that.
But I have a strong hunch, as you suggested, Aaron, that informally takes place by people talking with Jamie. And I think that's happening informally at that level. That may evolve though, with this expansion of the overlay map and with more history under our belts. So that's an interesting idea you raise.
Yeah, Alan, as the de facto developer of the group, I appreciate you groaning back and being the delivery person for those for those messages in that case.
Absolutely, and I really do believe what I say, that commerce business becomes more challenging. It becomes more complicated and technically demanding, and in large part that's a good thing. Because the work that we do then becomes more valuable, and valuable not just materially, but in other ways too.
Yeah. Right. Anything else in terms of NFP 2 or 3 discussion?
I was going to say there's no action needed, but think about some of those things and we can continue to probably build on some of those. We'll maybe throw it on the agenda as an item for next month too.
Great.
Thank you.
And item H on the agenda is old business. I don't see any old business on the agenda, but if there's anything I'm missing, feel free to jump in, Jamie.
No, you're good. I don't think there's any old business.
Okay. Great. Does anyone have any general announcements from the board or the city? Paul?
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right time to talk about this, but I visited the site on Stadium Drive where they're building a, gosh, what do they call that again? I call it a pot house, but they're
Provisioning center.
Okay, there you go. Anyway, I sent Jamie a couple of pictures, and actually, I just wanted to bring you guys up to speed. I'm a little obsessive about the retaining wall that they were planning back there. I had some comments about it when we approved it, to go, and so I've been curious about it. So I've been kind of stopping in because I go by there a lot. So I took a couple of pictures. I took one week or a couple of weeks ago where the wall was half built, and then I took one the other day where it was finished. And I'm very impressed actually about their construction technique, how they're doing it. I mean, it is a best management practice what they're doing to put that in. Jamie, if you could pull one of those up, I could yak about it a little bit and show you
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Give me 1 second.
I've never built or seen a block wall constructed this high. That's why I'm not an engineer, but I've dealt with the construction of retaining walls a lot in my career. And anyway, this is unique to me. That's why I'm a little concerned about it. But they're doing a good job of building it. So we get the picture up. I can show you what I'm talking about. Okay, there it was when it was half up. Now, if you look at the outside edge of it as it goes around the curve, right there, Jamie. That's all stone, and it goes down there. The black fabric that they have between the stone and the sand was placed in there to keep the sand from infiltrating the stone. So that's where all the water that the hydraulics that would be pushing that wall, that's the drainage area to keep that water out of there. So that's very impressive that they're doing that. The height of that sewer top, it looks like maybe a 5 foot or 6 foot wide. Anyway, that's the finish height of the wall and where the parking lot is going to be. So they did that. Now, Jamie, if you can come right in the middle, there's a survey tripod, a little bit. There you go. Go down where the wall, right there. Yeah. What they're doing there, and it shows if you could magnify it, that would be good. But they're putting in geotextile reinforcement, which is fence, is what it is. It's a mesh, a very, very sturdy mesh. And there's pegs that go in the top of the blocks. Those retaining wall blocks are made to be stacked, and those peg holes aren't necessarily to hold the blocks together. What that does is about every 4 or 5 courses, they put a fence between that layer and then bury it 4 or 5 feet into the hillside. So that gives it a lot of strength so that it won't come out. Okay, Jamie, could you get to the finish, the other one? There she is. She's a beauty. Yeah. Anyway, I don't have a complaint. I don't have a concern other than, oh boy, I hope it works. But they seem to be doing the best construction, all the good stuff that you have to do to put a high retaining wall in. Time will tell. You can see the box on the bottom right in the middle of the wall. Yeah, right there. That's one of the outlets for the drain coming through the wall, and that's where all the water that collects between the wall and that fabric, that's all that stone, that's where that will come out.
I was going to make just a couple of comments. The building official did reach out to me a while ago asking about this design, which, requires an engineered stamp drawing. And I thought in some of our early meetings with the developer that they were thinking something more like 12 feet tall, but we're way over 12 feet tall in this once the final design was out. And it would have been likely less expensive. And also, I think the building officials thought was more stable to do more of a tiered wall. So you're not building this tall wall. And so he was consulting with me as to what was allowed out here because of NFP. And I said, because they recommended the variance and asked for and sought and received the variance, and it had a very specific cutoff at the back, at a location in the back of the property to impact slopes as little as possible. And then they needed some space for storm water, or at least a settling and infiltration basin here in the back. And so, they went with this bigger design, and the building official said, that's fine. That's, if it's permittable and it's been engineered and that's been approved. So, yeah, I agree with Paul, though. This will be one of those to keep an eye on over time.
Yeah, it lends credence to Alan's comment earlier that just development is a complicated technical process, and seeing that and hearing all Paul's remarks make me think that the NFP process is probably the least technical of everything that they're trying to do there. But yeah, I really appreciate the photos and the follow-up, Paul. That's really interesting.
Now, that's a really good example of what we were talking about. Is I drove by the other day and saw that there was construction going on, but no, I didn't stop and inspect the site. And that's really helpful, Paul. Thank you, to show us how this thing really looks.
Cool. All right. Any other comments on Paul's update or any other announcements? Okay. Hearing none, we can adjourn tonight's meeting.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to check in with you.